would like to introduce Jérôme Laviolette, who is our Transportation and Climate Change Fellow. And Jérôme is a trained civil engineer. He completed his Master's of Applied Science this summer from Polytechnique Montreal, where he used GPS data to better understand the demand-supply profile of the taxi industry. So for this fellowship, Jérôme will focus on understanding individual car dependency and the barriers and opportunities to changing this behavior. So warm welcome to Jérôme.
Thank you, Andrea. All right. So yes, this is me. All right. So my project is about initiating sustainable change in mobility behavior. But before we get into this, let me just tell you a short story of how I ended up on this stage tonight. So ever since I was a child, I've been fascinated by public transit. Trams, trains, metro systems, and even buses. Every time I would go on a trip with my parents, we would take the subway. This would be an activity on itself, and I would keep a ticket for my collection. Fortunately, I couldn't find that collection, but I did find that picture of me in Charlottetown in 1993 being fascinated by that double-decker bus. And so I grew up in one of the core neighborhoods of Montreal. I was kind of lucky because I could walk, bike, take the bus and subway everywhere I needed to go. So I kind of never experienced the congestion that people experience every day when they drive. So every time I would find myself in a car, stuck in traffic, I would ask myself why. Not why is there traffic? This was pretty obvious to me, and this should be pretty obvious to everyone. The car, when driven by a single person, is not an effective way to move a lot of people all in the same direction at the same time. No, but rather why? Why do people accept to go through this? Where do they find the patience to do it? And I must admit, this is still something that boggles me today. And so I oriented myself, oh, I forgot to switch the slide, so traffic. So I oriented myself towards civil engineering, not necessarily to answer those questions that I asked, but to put myself to the task of improving our city's transportation systems. I recently, as Andrea said, graduated from a Master in Transportation Engineering under the supervision of Professor Catherine Morancy, who is an amazing woman for whom everything is possible. Opportunity and challenges somehow trickle down from her, and I managed to seize a few of those, one of them being this very fellowship. And so here I am tonight thinking about how we can initiate sustainable change in mobility behavior. And I believe this question is crucial to our future because like many aspects of the environmental cause, this is something that really touches us all. But what I like the most about working on transportation issues is that every time I tell people what I do, they kind of start sharing their experiences. We all have to commute to our daily activities. And so our individual and collective mobility choices really impacts us on a daily basis. So how can we get more people to move in harmony with their surroundings? And for me, this question's actually, the answer to this question starts by another question, which is, how can we convince people to get out of their cars? And for this, I believe we need to change the way we perceive the automobile. How can we get people to stop seeing our car-centric cities as normal? And however, we have to be very careful on how we phrase this. I'm here in front of a convinced crowd, but we have to be very careful because we need to make sure not to demonize the car or not to wage a war on the car, because this is sure to end up having the opposite effect. So one of my goals is to find the tone, the message, that could be actually effective at transforming the car into being only one among many alternatives, instead of it being so central to our cities and town transportation systems. So it is really about how to rebrand this idea that true mobility freedom in a city is achieved through a diversity of options and not by relying only on the private use of cars. And all our cities in Canada are built for cars. And they require massive infrastructure to sustain this mode of transportation, but unfortunately, all our cities still suffer from congestion. The cars, they are, of course, a major source of carbon emissions. They take up a lot of space in our neighborhoods, and the car-centric city planning of the last 50 years has made it very difficult for us to reverse that trend. And so all this, of course, has very negative impact on our health, on our environment, on the climate, and even on our economy. But most people are kind of blind to it because we are so attached to our cars. It is entangled so deeply in our culture that we that for many it is still a symbol of success and freedom. And so my project is to find, as two main objectives. It's a project I'll be conducting in Quebec, in the region of Montreal mainly. And it's first to identify those winning and innovative conditions that will allow us to establish a long-term strategy for sustainable change in mobility behavior. Through this, I wish to, of course, look at what has been done before in terms of marketing campaign, for example, that were effective at reducing car dependency elsewhere in the world. What is the right marketing that we can find? What other campaigns, not necessarily in mobility, but what kind of successful campaigns were used to change people's behavior for something better? We can think of how we reduce smoking, or how we reduce driving under the influence. There are certainly lessons that could be extracted from that, and I wish to learn from those. And of course, I wish to identify what's the missing data, what are the missing arguments, and to collect this missing data through different methods: surveys, workshops, focus groups, public consultation, deliberative dialogue. The second objective is actually to build a team and a network to actually work on several fronts. I cannot achieve this myself, of course not. And so we need to get people to work on this together, otherwise it's not going to work. And so I'm already lucky because I work with a team of other NGOs, the DSF staff in Montreal, other researchers on this issue. So the first thing is to strengthen this core team to work on the project to make sure we're effective at building the strategic plan. And the second thing is to identify who else do we need to engage. Nonprofits, community leaders, association, unions. How can we bring them on board and make us all rethink the way we plan mobility and transportation in our cities? And of course, I wish to contact and work with those groups a bit later on. So I'm still very curious to see where this project is going to lead, but I sincerely hope it can spark a positive change that can put Canadian cities and communities on a path toward a more brighter future. Thank you.